Hello, everybody, and welcome back to UXChange, the podcast where I exchange my user experiences to change them, and yours for the better. I'm Jeremy, a mentor and senior user researcher with over 8 years of experience and a background in neuroscience. Throughout my career, I've had the privilege of engaging with hundreds of users around the world, spanning across Europe, the USA, Africa, and India. This has allowed me to deliver actionable insights that have improved user experiences with nutrition, automotive, delivery, and e-commerce sectors. I've created this podcast with the aim of providing my mentorship and educational content, offering actionable tips, knowledge, and guidance in the realm of research, specifically focusing on UX research to anyone having an interest in this area. And I hope that you will find this episode insightful.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to UXChange. I'm very happy to be back to kickstart this third episode of this 3-episode series on usability testing. If you're new to the podcast, first of all, I highly encourage you to go to listen to previous episodes to get a sense of what this podcast is about, and also because I cover some topics in other episodes and sometimes it's kind of related. So I used to refer in new episodes to things that I said in the previous ones, so you can benefit from it. You can also take them as standalone topics. It's also meant to be this way, but just in case you want to do so, I highly encourage you to do it. So this episode is part of a 3-episode series on usability testing. Same, I highly encourage you, if you haven't done it, to go listen to the first and second part. In the first part, I cover the flow of a usability test. So how should a usability test be scheduled, organized, in terms of parts, let's say. So you have the introduction, then you have contextual dive-in, conducting the test in itself, giving a scenario, some tasks, asking your users to think out loud, giving some scales, for instance, and then having some kind of follow-up questions, some kind of post-usability test interview, you might call it this way. And finally, thank the participants. So this is really like to have a broad sense of the flow of a usability test. This is part 1. Then you have part 2, which is about how to write a usability task to be rigorous and to actually measure what you really want to measure. So this second episode is focused on how to phrase a task. It should be goal-based. It shouldn't be too specific. It shouldn't be biased, of course. You shouldn't lead your user into clicking in one area or another of the stimulus, the product, the service. You shouldn't be leading your user in any case. So that's the main topic of the second episode. And today I will start this third episode, and this will be a wrap-up for the whole series. I hope you will learn at least something in this episode as well. In this episode, we will cover how to define usability testing metrics. So this is something that you might have read in a lot of blog posts, articles, and so on. And actually, I get a lot of requests in mentoring sessions about metrics. And then I get a lot of questions because people seem to be quite lost with this topic, and rightfully so, because it tends to be quite technical. And so that's why I wanted to cover this topic, to kind of ease the pain here and tell you to relax and everything is gonna be all right, let's say. So about the metrics, let's start. You have several kind of metrics. So first of all, what is a metric? A metric is how you will measure an outcome or let's say a behavior or a user, an information about the user, how you will measure it. So it's kind of the numerical information that you get by measuring something. And so this is numerical in essence, and so that's why we call it measuring, because it's a measure of a behavior, of a user information, and so on. So it's a measure, okay? And so it's tend to be numerical. So that's why I get a lot of requests and a lot of questions regarding what should be my usability metrics, basically. So and for me, that's important first to step back. That's why it's a bit complicated at first to explain, because you need to step back and think, okay, you have the goal, let's say, of measuring something. Okay, why do you want to measure? Let's first ask these questions. Why do you want to measure, I don't know, a task success rate? Let's call it this way, okay? And so task success rate is an example of usability metrics. It's the rate at which you have your users successfully completing a task. Let's say I have an app which is about booking a dog sitter, and so I want to ask my users, okay, you need to book a dog sitter. So here, referring back to the second episode of how to phrase a task, so I highly encourage you to listen to it. But yes, so you define a task, and then based on this task, your user, your participant, will actually perform the action that he or she is expected to perform, right? And then you will have a set of metrics for you to be able to tell if the product, so I'm frequently referring to digital products such as apps, but it can be adapted to everything, every scenario, okay? And so you have a task and you observe your user, and then you're able to measure, to tell if the actual product, service, anything at the service of your user is performing well, if the product is able to help the user accomplish his or her goal. That's why the measure is here. However, before diving into it and into the different kinds of measures and how you can use them, I would prefer first to step back, and that's why I always do in my mentorship sessions, and ask the mentees, for instance, why do you want to measure something? So measuring is about numbers, and if you measure with numbers, you need a certain number of participants and a certain amount of data for it to make sense. So here, I'm not diving into this. I'm actually thinking about launching a course on statistics, because I also have a background in statistics. So probably you will have a link at some point, and you will be able to enroll if you're interested. By the way, go to my website, go to the form that you can fill if you're interested. You can also communicate these kind of things like, okay, I'm interested in the course you mentioned. When is it going out? If you're interested, that can be an indicator for me. Closing the parenthesis here. So you need a certain number of participants, okay, for it to make sense. Statistical laws start, let's say, to be applicable or defined at a certain number of participants. So if, for instance, you want to measure a behavior, let's say that your app I don't know, is a certain amount of intuitiveness, okay? So for this, you will have some metrics such as task success rate, time on task, the paths your users were taking to go from one screen to another, and so on and so forth, okay? So you will come up with numbers, and you will actually do some kind of descriptive statistics. Descriptive statistics are a way to describe your data by doing a kind of first degree of analysis. So we are all used to that. We all did that in college or in university, for instance, and even not in college and university. When you do an average, okay, it's a summary statistic, an average. So what you will do, imagine you have 5, 10 users, and you will observe for all of these users, the ones who actually succeeded in the task and the ones who did not. And for the ones who succeeded, you say 1. You put a 1 somewhere, okay, and then you simply count them. And then you divide the number of people who succeeded in the task, and you divide them by the number of the total number of participants. So that is the task success rate, for instance, okay? But my point here is that for it to be significant, for it to actually tell you something, you need to have a certain number of participants. And statistical laws start to emerge at 30 participants in general. So for instance, you have the normal law, which has kind of a, so it's defined by a curve in the form of a bell, so it's bell shaped and so on. I'm not going into detail, but the idea is that you need to have at least, and depending on the test you're doing, 30 participants in general, depending on the tests and depending on the area of study. Some tests will require you more participants, such as 50, for instance. If you're doing some kind of surveys, like market research, it's expected to have at minimum 100 participants. And why? Why do we say 100? Because so it's kind of trial and error in general. It's defined this way, but again, statistical laws are defined at 30 participants, right? So we always kind of secure the outcome by thinking, okay, if I enroll 100 participants in my survey, probably I will kind of have 3 groups, 3 clusters, like 3 different kind of customers, groups of customers. And so if I have 3, maybe I have 3 of 30. So that's in general, these good practices are defined this way, because at 30, when you conclude about a behavior or an action or something, you can have more confidence. Let's put it this way. So my point being that if you want to measure something, it's with a high quantity of participants. If you want to have a numerical measure, then if you have a high quantity of participants, the goal of your usability task and of your user research is not the same as the one you have when you do qualitative research. So that's why I'm always saying to mentees, okay, we are talking about usability metrics, fine, really good, but okay, do you have the number that you want to have? And if you have this number, are you actually doing the right kind of test? Because a usability task with a certain amount of participants is quantitative and should be unmoderated. Why? Because if you moderate it, it will be really difficult for you to moderate, 50 tests. So that's why. I'm stepping back every time, stepping back, and then we ask other questions such as, okay, then you need to do unmoderated if you want measures. But why do you need to do it unmoderated? Let's think about this. Okay. Then we come back to the notion of moderated versus unmoderated. So the advantage of being moderated is that you can ask questions in between and gather qualitative data, but you will have less participants. That's the, let's say, drawback, if I might call it this way. It's not really a drawback. It's because you need less people. You just need qualitative information. You just need words to describe what's happening. You don't need averages or percentages. You don't need that. You need first to understand what's happening. So that's why you use a moderated test. And if you use an unmoderated one, it's because you want to validate something. You need numbers to validate, so you need to count. You need to say, okay, I have a strong hypothesis that this version of my app is actually performing better than the previous one. Okay, you have a strong hypothesis. And so you need to ask questions such as, okay, how many participants out of the amount I have are succeeding in this task? This will be a rightful indicator of the performance of my app or of my service or my website or whatever. Okay, so these are 2 types of questions serving 2 types of goals. And in one case, you will have, and that's why I'm carving all this. In one case, you will have metrics, usability metrics, and it's the unmoderated usability task with a higher number of participants and some descriptive statistics, such as averages, percentages, and so on. Only this way your metrics will make sense. And stepping back one last time about why we are doing unmoderated and moderated. Well, we do unmoderated when we have a higher confidence in our hypothesis. When in this double diamond process of designing a product, you always start first by the most qualitative part of course. If you don't know anything about your users, who are your users, what are their problems, and so on, you need information. This information is brought to you by qualitative. And so that's why you do interviews, for instance. Okay, now you identify the problem, you design the product, and you need to know how it works, but you're quite not sure about the flow, about the screens, about the copy, about you're quite not sure. You're not validating before going to market. You're just putting a step forward, one step at a time, reducing uncertainty. And so that's why you will have to do usability tests, but moderated, asking questions to your participants to have more info. So that in this case, metrics do not make sense. It doesn't make sense. Your usability task will be moderated and it will be qualitative. And then you refine your interface. Let's say if we take an app as an example, you refine the interface and then you go unmoderated with a higher number of participants because you're quite sure that this app or this service is answering your users' needs, is solving your users' problems. But you need to have some kind of last minute, let's say, or last level confidence about your product. And this numbers will give it to you. So I really wanted to make this clear about the distinction between unmoderated, moderated, qualitative, quantitative, and in the quantitative, you will have metrics. Why am I saying all that? Is because I have a lot of mentees asking me, okay, I'm doing a moderated test. What should be my metrics? So that's why here you should step back, pause, step back, and asking yourself, okay, do I really want metrics? Is this really needed? Because maybe not. Metrics are not like, how can I say, the compulsory ingredient you should have in usability tests. That's the whole point. Okay. I have a sense I made my point. So moving forward, now imagine you really want to have metrics and you really want to measure something in your usability tasks. So what are the kinds of metrics that you will measure? How can you analyze them? Okay, and how can you make sense of them? Now, this part will be more focused on this. So let's take the example of an app that you developed. You refined it several times through moderated usability testing, for instance, and then you arrive at a version that you think is quite mature. But before, let's say, putting it into production, you want to validate that this is giving the outcome in terms of usability, only usability. And also some kind of perception, so ease of use, satisfaction, and so on. Okay, let's get into the detail. So you have different kinds of metrics. You have the behavioral metrics, and you have the attitudinal metrics. Okay, behavioral is about the behavior, is about what your users are doing. And so these are metrics that you gather without even asking anything to your user, except the task that you give at the beginning. But you're not asking a question and expecting an answer. You're just asking them, okay, use the following prototype to book a nanny for your children next week on a Sunday, whatever. You can be broader than that, to be honest. But that's the idea. Okay, and then you have your users, but this is unmoderated. Your users are actually performing the action, I don't know, 50 users, and then 3 days after you collect all the data. Okay. And if you use some platforms, the one I have in mind is Maze, which is actually doing this very good. I think user testing is not doing this quite good, actually, but to be confirmed. Again, I have no partnership or sponsorship with Maze. I actually love how they handle the data in usability tests. But yeah, so what can you gather from this? You can gather several types of metrics, such as the task success rate, the time on task, the error rate, the first clicks, the paths that your users are taking, and that will be, if I'm not wrong, quite it for behavioral metrics. I actually don't have notes here. I'm just speaking out of memory. So some tasks will give you an indication of if your interface is actually solving your users' needs and helping them accomplish their goals. That's it. It's just about it. Like, do they succeed or not? It's as simple as that. And for that, you have the task success rate. Okay. And so it's just about, okay, I have 50 participants and 40 managed to reach their goal. Just taking that as a measure. Okay, then you do 40 divided by 50, and you get into a percentage, and you have your task success rate. That's it. Okay? But then we can actually complement that with another metric, which is the time on task. Okay, probably they all succeeded. If I'm looking at this from a very, very far point of view, they almost all succeeded. Good. Okay, but maybe they struggled along the way. And that's why the time on task is actually giving you. If 40 out of 50 succeeded to reach their goal, but I don't know, 25 lasted double compared to the other 25, there's actually a problem here. So, yes, your users might succeed, but if they have to go back and forth between screens and so on, it's actually not optimal. So, the time on task is actually the time it takes for your users to go from the first screen to the success, let's say the success screen, last screen, okay, if they reach the goal. You take this time and you make an average. It's as simple as that. You make an average and you have your average success time. Of course, success time, time on task. Of course, there are some other analysis that you can make depending on your needs. So you have the time at each screen. This is actually very much more granular, and I really love to have this metric. So Maze is able to give you this. At each screen, you will have the time your users stared at the screen, for instance. Okay. And so you can have an indication. Imagine your flow is about like 4 or 5 screens. You can say, okay, screen number 2 is really, really problematic because my users spent a lot of time here. But it actually depends, of course. Take into account facts such as, do I have a text for my users to read? Do I have multiple steps that they have? I don't know, maybe they have to fill out a form. So that's normal, they take time. So about all the metrics, consider, of course, benchmarks. So maybe you can test your competitor's app and you can compare it to your app to make sure, okay, my app is actually doing better for the same end use case. So you need to have a kind of baseline metric to be able to compare. If you're comparing version 2 of your app to version 1, you will have a notion of if it's improving or not. And of course, take into account the activity by itself, because filling out a form, of course, doesn't require the same amount of time as just, I don't know, looking for a nanny, whatever. My point is that maybe one task takes more time than another type of task, and it's actually normal. So don't freak out if you see high amount of long durations. Think about the activity per se. Okay, so you have this, but it's actually not enough. You also have because I'm going from the broadest to the most specific. You can have the task success rate telling you giving you the information about do they succeed completing the goal? Okay, but now I want to know, do they struggle with the time on task? Do they struggle? And then if you zoom in again with another type of metric, you actually have how do they struggle? And these are the paths taken by your participants, the clicks that they are doing, the wrong clicks, the heat maps. Okay, just giving some definitions here. So you have a metric which is called the misclicks. A misclick, so when you have your prototype, you have your screens laid out, let's say welcome screen, then you have the booking a nanny screen, then you have sending a message screen, confirmation screen, whatever. Okay, when you do a prototype, in general, not everything will be active depending on the level of fidelity. So you have some CTAs, call to action, or button if you prefer, that will be active and some others will not. And so depending on the path you want your users to take, you know that they will have to click on this or that CTA or a button to reach the next screen. Okay, and so that in some user testing platforms such as Maze, they're able to track if the user clicked here or not, on the right expected button or not. If they did, this is counted as a, let's say, well, it's not really counted, but it's like a right click. Okay, they did it right. Okay, but then you also have all the spots they clicked on, which is not the expected one. it's not what we call the happy path. Happy path is going from point 0 to last point of the prototype. But like it's only the expected path to take. Everything that deviates from it is quote unquote a mistake. It's not a mistake because if your user is doing this, is that it makes sense for him or for her, okay? But it's what we will call a misclick. A misclick is clicking on an area as a researcher you were not expecting them to click. You can distinguish them into two sub measures, which are the actual misclicks. You can see this is getting quite specific, but you have some misclicks. If you see that they are repeated, it's like, okay, they are really, really struggling and they are looking to find this information here. And sometimes you have what we call slips. A slip is the fact of clicking on something when you meant to click on something else, but it's like, I don't know, you made it by mistake because it's close to the region you were expecting to click on. And so it's called a slip because you were not intentionally headed there, but the interface is made so that it led you to click there. Okay. And so these information, such as the misclicks, the repeated clicks as well, so that, okay, I'm clicking, I don't know, I'm expecting to find my nanny in sub-menu called, I don't know, home or whatever, bookings. Okay, imagine you put it there, but you see your users clicking on search. It's not there, okay, but you see that they repeatedly click on it. It gives you the information, okay, they really, really expect the nannies to be found in the search area. Sorry for the examples, I just made that up, but I hope you're understanding. So this is the misclick. And then the misclick, if you aggregate them and if you count them, some platforms, again, such as Maze, by now you understood I really love Maze, are able to agglomerate this data into heat maps. Okay, and so the more your users are clicking in an area, the more red it will be in your data analysis, let's say visualizations, and the more it goes uncolored, let's say, the less it was clicked. That's the idea. So red, it means this is an area that has been clicked a lot, and so this is what we have. All the metrics, and these are behavioral metrics. But then, of course, you have other types of metrics, which are attitudinal. Attitudinal metrics are metrics, sorry for the redundancy here, intended to measure an attitude. An attitude means how can I say, what is my attitude towards something, means what is my, it will not be quite accurate, but it's kind of what is my opinion, to what extent do I like or do not like something, how do I perceive it. It's about perceptions, opinions, tastes, maybe not taste, sorry, but you get the idea. It's attitude is something that is declared. It's not something that is observed, it's something that is declared. Together, to what extent you like or are satisfied by an interface, I have to ask you. I can also observe you, like, I don't know, if you're smiling, if you're making some facial expressions. Of course, I can do that, but it will be only one piece of the story. I also have to ask you. Okay, John Doe, to what extent are you satisfied or unsatisfied with this experience? And then you will give me a grade between 0 and 10, 1 and 9, 1 and 7. These are the most usual ways of giving the scales. I will not get into detail. I will make an episode specifically on that, but that's the idea. You can also gather this information. So in general, these kind of scales are given at the end of the usability task and before the qualitative follow-up questions, because you do not want your answers in the qualitative follow-up questions to bias your scales. The scale is repeatable. All your users and participants will have the same. And so if they are biased, no worries. They are all biased the same way. Maybe they are biased, yes, to some extent, but they are all biased the same way. Whereas if you ask after your usability task to your users, okay, what was clear or unclear? What did you think about the layout? What did you think about the copy? Then your users, you will probe them. They will be probed to answer things they didn't like or found frustrated and so on. And based on that, then they will give their grades. Whereas maybe that's my opinion only. Maybe it's not a good practice, but I think it's way better to give your scales after the usability task so that it's raw. It's like unbiased information, and then after that, you ask them directly about, okay, now develop, okay? And so what are the type of scales that I used to give? This can be, for instance, satisfaction. It can be ease of use. It can be clarity. So, okay, not getting into specifics, but you should know that there are different types of scales. This stems from psychology and psychology studies. So you can ask two things about your users. You can ask them how do they feel, and you can ask them to describe what an interface is like. So if I ask you, to what extent are you satisfied? To what extent are you, sorry, this is a biased question, by the way. It shouldn't be satisfied. It should be satisfied or unsatisfied. So because then you're leading them to answer that they are satisfied anyway. So this is one way you can ask them and measuring them from 0 to 10. Okay. If you want it to be less biased, you can also ask them to rate the degree to indicate the extent to which they are satisfied or unsatisfied in the following scale. And then it's like bipolar. It goes from unsatisfied to satisfied, the two extremes. You can also ask them to agree or disagree with a statement. The statement being, I'm highly satisfied with this experience. And then they need to rate on a scale extremely disagree or extremely agree. Okay? And then so this is one part. You can ask them about their perception of their feelings. Okay? And you have another way to ask this. To ask this. No, to get a feedback regarding the output of the experience. You can ask them, how did the interface or the product, the experience, the flow did in terms of some criteria. So, for instance, you can ask them how clear or unclear was the interface. So here we are describing the clarity of the interface. So it's really a criteria and a descriptor of your product. So it can be clarity, it can be ease of use, it can be intuitiveness, amount of information. So my point is that you have several ways to measure attitudes. So what people feel about themselves and what do they think about the product itself. And actually, as I'm also myself quite not sure about the best practices on this, I will refer you to really consult about the best practices to ask things. I think, if I'm not wrong, I think it's better to ask, when you ask your users to actually describe how a product is, it's better to give what we call bipolar scales. So like unclear to clear, or unhelpful to helpful, whatever. Okay, I think this format is better, because it's easier for them to describe a product between two extremes, which are clearly described, and it's like really opposed one to another. That's the idea. And I think that psychologically it's easier for users to score products this way. So that's one way. And then if you ask them about their feelings, I also think it's better to ask them to rate on a scale from 1 to 9. 9, for instance, indicating highly satisfied, and 1 indicating, for instance, highly dissatisfied. Okay? I think it's easier for them, for users, for us, for everyone, to rate a feeling on a scale from 1 to 9, 1 to 10, than for products. And you can also ask them the extent to which they agree or disagree. For this one, I'm quite not sure, to be honest. I tend to not use it a lot. I prefer to use the numbers and the the bipolar one. Also because the analysis that goes from here is quite different. If you ask them to agree or disagree, it will be more qualitative, because you can count percentages. So you can say, okay, I have 50% of people who strongly agree to this statement. Okay, that's another way to treat the data. But if you want to say, okay, my interface is making people 8.4 satisfied on an average out of 10, for instance. So these are different kinds of treatments and of analysis that you can do after. And so depending on your goal, you should adapt the methodology to gather the information. So that will be it for the episode of today on usability metrics. I hope you at least learned one thing. If you did, please rate this podcast, leave me a review on the website. It will highly, highly help me to improve. And I have some announcements to make. So first of all, I don't know if you knew, because I never mentioned it, but I'm also available on Medium, where I'm writing some articles, on Substack as well. I write articles about about user research, also of course usability, but not only user research, UX in general. So on Medium and on Substack, I also reproduced this podcast on YouTube. If you do not have access to any podcasting platform so this one is available on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, but if you do not have access, I'm also available on YouTube. All the links will be given in the description, but you can also look for me searching in YouTube for UXChange, on Spotify, on Apple Podcast, and so on. And I'm recently available on Twitter, so check out my Twitter account just by searching for UXChange. And on Twitter, you can expect me to publish every single day my Think Aloud moment. So it's just one quick tweet about some thoughts that I have in my mind about UX research in general, and my experience overall. Sometimes it will not be focused on UX and UX research. It can be about productivity. It can be about anything. So I hope you found the content useful, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Bye-bye. And that's it for today's episode. Thank you everyone for joining me today on UXChange. I hope you found today's episode insightful and valuable. Make sure to subscribe in order for you not to miss the next episode. Share it if you liked it, and leave a review. Thank you for your time and attention. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future topics, feel free to reach out directly to me. You can find all the details in the show notes. And see you in the next episode. Bye-bye. Yo.